Hello, this is Dr. Mewborn, and this is Religion in the Public Square. Today we're looking at biblical principles concerning government. So we've been kind of walking through the government in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, but now we're going to look more at the biblical principles that God has laid out for us through the Old Testament and New Testament. Let's begin by looking at how God has punished evil in the past, or the seriousness that God shows toward evil. First, we see Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. In Genesis chapter 2, God told Adam not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In other words, he could eat of any tree in the garden, but he must not eat of this tree. If he eats of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, he would surely die. And we know that through the text, as we read through Genesis chapter 3, we see that Adam and Eve both went through curses because of their sinfulness. We also recognize that they both would one day perish. We also see that they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. So God really punishes evil in a very quick way, a swift way at that time, but he just shows us a seriousness that he has against it. We also see where Cain kills Abel, and God is very upset with Cain. He actually tells him that sin is crouching at the door. Do not let it overtake you. That's what he told Cain in chapter 4 of Genesis. But Cain fell victim to temptation and ended up killing his brother. And because of that, God casts him out, and he was going to become a wanderer on the earth, and really just fearing for his life for all those years. And so God was showing his seriousness there also. But one of the most unbelievable, or not unbelievable, but most amazing events in history was the worldwide flood that took place in Genesis chapter 6. It was then this time that God was extremely upset with all the people on the earth except for Noah and his family. And this is actually what it says in Genesis 6, 5 through 8. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. This picture is a very good example of God's seriousness about sinfulness. You can imagine during this time with the wind and the waves and the torrential downpour, earthquakes were taking place at this time. The earth was changing because of water being over the complete face of the earth, and everybody else that was on the earth, other than those who were in the ark, perished. And that was because of God's judgment on a people that were living with evil thoughts, living with evil intentions, and this was their thinking completely, and God brought his justice forth. And this is a picture of who God is and how serious he is about evil. But you see even further in this, in Genesis chapter 9, verse 5 and 6, this is after the flood. Noah and his kids have gotten off the ark. Noah's wife and his family have gotten off the ark. And this is one of the things that God makes very clear to Noah. It says, and for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. For every beast I will require it, and from man, from his fellow man, I'll require reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. So God is very serious about things such as murder. And he was saying that people will pay for these types of things. And then later on, we see this come up again in with the Jews in Exodus chapter 20, when Moses is given the Ten Commandments. And of course, one of the Ten Commandments is, thou shalt not murder. With these evil intentions. And then Jesus says it later on with the Sermon on the Mount about if you have hatred toward your brother in your heart, you are guilty of murder. So God is very serious about these types of things, and this mindset that a person can have, and of course actions. And so government should definitely punish evil. That's the way God has put it out there. Also, government is very important And anarchy is something that we learned about in our book, Politics According to the Bible. But anarchy is destructive. Anarchism means this: no person may rule over another. Um, you could define the word anarchy in this way: a situation where there is no effective government at all. That would be one definition. Then another would be a state of lawlessness or political disorder due to the absence of governmental authority. And so when you take out governmental authority and you're taking out someone that's ruling, what you're doing is saying we've got the freedom to do whatever we want to do. And it really is, many people believe that, well, that's better. And that means I'm not being oppressed. I'm not being pushed down. I've got freedom. But really what you're seeing is kind of the picture of a train off the track. It can't go anywhere because only on the track does it have freedom to go somewhere. And so the tracks seem like they're rules for us, but actually they're good for us. And God put rules in place for us to live by because it's good for us and it takes care of us. It's like the train on the tracks, or maybe the fish in the bowl. You take the fish out of the bowl and it can't breathe and it can't live. And so it's the same idea that that bowl or those tracks actually, those rules actually give life. And so this is kind of important when we're looking at the idea of why is government important. I've got some pictures here, and I don't know if you've ever seen these before, but this is just I believe it's a show called Sons of Anarchy, and I think it's a biker gang. I haven't seen the show, but anyways, it's these guys are kind of trying to create their own way of living, not by rules or by anybody else's rules, but they're kind of doing things on their own. Another thought of it would be no gods, no masters. No one can master us. No one can take us over. I found something kind of funny here. Don't forget to eat your lunch and make some trouble. And so this is this mom dressing up her son who's an anarchist. And so it's just this idea that we can do whatever we want and we're not being pushed down by anybody else. And a lot of times you'll see this played out in social media. You'll see this played out in riots. You'll see it played out in a lot of different ways. And actually, you see it played out in the Bible as well, how destructive it can really be. The book of Judges is a special book because it speaks a lot of this idea of anarchy. People were trying to do whatever they want to do in their own eyes. This is what the Bible says in these verses, especially. In those days, there was no king in Israel. So this is a time when there's no main leader who is under the anointing of God, who's guiding the people. And so in those days, there was no king in Israel. That's what we know. And then it also says in these verses, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So it was a very dark time because there was no enforcement of law. People were just doing what they wanted to do, and it caused tremendous amount of harm and pain, and other nations were coming in and attacking the people of Israel because there was no one there to enforce any laws and protect the people of Israel from a lot of things until God put some people in place to do that. So what he did was God appointed judges to protect the Jewish people. And these judges were people who were supernaturally empowered to actually protect the people of Israel from all types of if you want to call it terrorism, if you want to call it people that are coming in and just trying to wipe out the Jews, whatever it was. But God put these judges in place to help protect. What's really neat and kind of a bonus thought here is that the story of Ruth and Boaz happened during this time. And so that beautiful, amazing story of this young lady who is a Moabitess that actually loses her husband, loses her father-in-law, finds herself going back to Bethlehem where her family, actually her late husband and of course her mother-in-law, where they're from, and father-in-law, but she ends up going back there with her mother Naomi, or mother-in-law Naomi, and when they go back there, she meets this man named Boaz, and Boaz becomes her kinsman redeemer and takes her in. It's this amazing story of redemption, and it is right in the middle of the time of the Judges that is such a dark time. Now, one of the things that we see is government should execute justice, and we see this because God appointed judges. We just talked about that, but here's some of the judges that He appointed. He appointed approximately 15 judges to oversee the children of Israel. Some people included Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Samson. You can Othniel is another person, Eli, Samuel, different people like this, but they were the ones who were truly called and appointed and anointed to judge the people and take care of the people in such harsh times, because they definitely need it. Also, we see that Moses appointed judges. If you've seen this story before, but this story is a story of Moses' father-in-law and telling Moses to bring judges into helping him judge the people. And this is before the giving of the law, the Ten Commandments. It says this. It says, "Now obey my voice. I will give you advice." This is Jethro speaking. "And God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring their cases to God. And you shall warn them about the statutes and the laws and make them know the way in which they must walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, of tens. And let them judge the people at all times. Every great matter they shall bring to you, but any small matter they shall decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you." And what happens here is Moses appoints these judges that Jethro advised him to do, and he said, "God be with you in this," and this is what he does, and it ends up being a very wonderful thing, of course, for the people of Israel and for Moses. And it's around this time, or not long after this time, that God on Mount Sinai gives Moses the Ten Commandments. Going further with this, justice for the weak and the helpless. We see this, that the government should execute justice and defend the weak. What do we see about helping the weak and helpless? Psalm 82, 2 through 4 says, "How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Selah. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked." And so, words such as bringing justice to those who are hurting, the helpless, the fatherless, helping them. If you want to speak of orphans or maybe widows or people that have been oppressed or enslaved in some way, right now in the world today, human trafficking is a major, major issue. The persecuted church is a major issue. There's all types of slavery that's going around the world, and we must do a part in that, helping that as part of helping the weak and the helpless. This is a part of what the government should be doing, but of course individuals can be a part of this as well. But it's one of the things that God has said that government should be a part of. The other thing is justice for the wicked and evildoers. Ecclesiastes says this in chapter 8, verse 11, "Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily, the heart of the children of man is fully set to do evil." And in other words, people the government especially needs to execute judgment on the wicked and evildoers and do it quickly, so that they don't continue on and actually create a population of people that go further into evil, because there is no way out of all those types of things. And so government should execute justice and defend the weak. Another thing that I think is pretty important when we're talking about this subject of how governments should judge and execute justice. They should do it in a nonpartisan way, or not by any form of prejudice or anything like that. And how do you do that? Well, it's in this way, that justice is blind. You can see, I guess you'd say, Lady Justice here, and she's got a blindfold over her face as she's weighing the scales. This is simply an idiom that refers to the impartiality of the law, regardless of such things like skin color, ethnic background, financial status, or celebrity status. No one is above the law. Everyone must respect the laws of the land. So regardless of where you come from in your life, or the way that you actually look, anything like that. It should not play into how you are judged. What should be judged is your action based on what the law is. And so that's why we say justice is blind, because this is the way it really should be looked at. And our government in America is based on biblical principles in general. And so we believe in this, that everybody has a right to defend themselves. And then, of course, if somebody is found guilty, then they are to fall under the laws of the land and whatever those say. But up until that point and going through that process, justice is blind. Um, Kind of going forward with government should help others, we looked a little bit at this with Romans chapter 13, and I just kind of want to brush over it one more time. Number one, God has appointed governing authorities. He has put people into place. I was thinking just the other day about the time that Jesus was before Pilate, and Pilate was speaking to him of and telling Jesus what he could do with Jesus, and that he could put him to death and all those things. And Jesus said, "You would have no authority unless it was given to you by God." And so God is appointing governing authorities in general. He is the one that's overseeing that and putting those into place. And that's what makes you think we need to honor those. Even when Paul spoke against one of the high priests of his day, when he spoke against him, he actually apologized for that, because he said, "I didn't know you were one of the leaders and rulers of our people." And he pulled back and said, "I did not mean to come against you," because he knows this law and he knows what God has put into place. And so this is a very important thing to think of, how God has appointed governing authorities. Also, number two, this chapter speaks of don't resist the civil laws that are good. Those civil laws that are good, stand up for those. Respect the civil laws that are good. So, in other words, treat them in such a way that they have a point in this life, and and to understand them for what they are. Very important. Number four, laws are for your good. The laws help you. The laws are there to guide you. The laws are there for your protection and for the protection of others. And so understanding those types of things as well. And then number five, all civil law is summed up in this: love your neighbor. That's what verse 9 actually talks about. Love your neighbor as yourself. And it's saying the greatest civil law can be, all the great civil laws of this land can be grouped into one category, and loving and serving and caring for those around you. And that's what we're supposed to do. Government should help others. You see this also in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 13 through 17. It says, "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil, or to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone. Love the brotherhood. Fear God. Honor the emperor." And the picture here is, and this would have been at a very dark time, um, Emperor Nero during this time, which is just a very harsh person toward Christianity. Um, but what he's saying there is respect those who are in power, respect those, and honor people in such a place, because God had, of course, he was the one who was ordaining them into these positions. And so we should consider them in that way, but also be praying for them. The best way to honor somebody, the best way to serve somebody, is truly pray for them. Now, one of the things that our book talks about is turning the other cheek. And that's based on Matthew 5:39. "But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Now, here's a good question. How long am I supposed to turn the other cheek before I start overturning tables? If you remember, Jesus overturned the tables in the temple when people were using them for buying and selling goods. And so it was being used completely in the wrong way. So let's kind of look at this this whole idea of turning the cheek in Matthew 5:39. Number one, Jesus is not talking about the responsibilities of government in that passage. He's speaking instead about personal conduct, the way that we live our lives, of turning the cheek. If somebody does evil to us, show them love. And in showing them love, we're going to cover a multitude of sins. And so that's the picture there. If somebody hurts you, don't respond and don't retaliate with hurtfulness. It's an illustration, but it's also giving you a way of living. Two wrongs don't make a right, that whole idea there. This is an example of Jesus' humility. And I'll tell you why I see it like that. Number four, the context of the verse expresses God's love for others and hatred towards sin. So this is the Sermon on the Mount. Christians see Jesus' unconditional love in this verse. One of the great ways to look at that for us is when we look at when Jesus was before the high priest in John chapter 18. And I want to read this to you just so we kind of have it all in context. And it says this: the high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples at his teaching. Now this is when he is arrested. Of course, you see him bound there. He's before all these people, the high priest, and now he's being questioned about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, saying, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. When he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered him, If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me? Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Okay, and so Annas was the high priest at the time, and of course that was turned over to Caiaphas as well. But one of the things that you see here is that he is asking, why did you strike me? But he also, throughout the rest of this time, he doesn't really speak up for himself. He actually just goes willingly to his death. That is a picture of his humility, that he's willing to serve others. And even when he was on the cross, he said these words, Forgive them, for they know not what they do. I think there's a good picture there, as those men had beaten him, they had flogged him, they had struck him many times, and he calls out from the cross and says, Forgive them, for they know not what they do. If that's not turning the cheek, I don't know really what is, but what we can see here is that his instruction for us is to respond to hatred with love, that love would overcome that hatred completely. And so this is the conduct that we're talking about, but this is also how governments should be thinking and as we move forward and all those types of things. So these are biblical principles concerning government. And so it's been so good to be with you today. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and we will see you soon. All right? Bye-bye.